So, I want to start by giving you a little background about this pilgrimage. Um, why did I go in the first place? And for many years, this pilgrimage has been, if you like, a bucket list item for me. Um, I've long wanted to go to the places that the Buddha taught and meditated in, to really immerse myself in his life and his teachings. I hoped that visiting the sites that he lived in and taught in and meditated in would be um, the physical places would really ground me in the teachings and the practice and really bring them alive for me in a very immediate way. And I have to say that it did both of those. So that's great. I was also encouraged to go by what the Buddha says in one of the suttas, in which he recommends that his followers visit 4 places: where he was born in Lumbini, Nepal, where he attained awakening in Bodh Gaya, where he gave his first teachings in Sarnath, and specifically in Deer Park in Sarnath, and lastly, where he died in Kushinagar. And in February, I visited all of those places and many others associated with his life and teaching. And I went with a tour company that visits Buddhist sites and is actually run by a Buddhist. It's the only tour company that I know of that visits Buddhist sites and is also run by a Buddhist. And it's called Buddha Path. And it was founded and is run by a student of Thich Nhat Hanh's, who's actually a teacher in the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition, called Shantum Seth. And I highly, highly, highly recommend Buddha Path and Shantum Seth if anyone ever considers doing a trip to India to visit the Buddhist sites. However, I booked this a long time ago, and the original dates were February 1st to the 17th, something like that, and bought my airline tickets. But then in about November, I got an email from Buddha Path saying they had changed the dates because there was a group of monastics from Plum Village, where Thich Nhat Hanh's place, that couldn't manage the original dates. So they changed the dates, and of course I'd bought my airline tickets and I couldn't change them. So this was a bit of an issue or problem, potential problem. But what Buddha Path did was they offered me my own private guide and driver for the pilgrimage, and to keep to the original dates. So I took them up on that offer, which had some advantages and at least one disadvantage. The advantage being that, you know, when I got tired, I could say, okay, I want to go back to the hotel now, and my schedule was pretty flexible. The other big advantage was that I got to visit some of the smaller sites that are on really narrow, small roads that big tour buses and coaches can't get to. So I got to see some places that other pilgrims, other tourist pilgrims didn't get to see. Disadvantage was, of course, that I wasn't with other people. I didn't have anyone else to meditate with or to really talk to other than my guide. But I think it turned out great. So the pilgrimage itself was 17 days, and I extended it by 3 days at the beginning in Delhi just to acclimatize, and also with 2 tour extensions on the end. one to Agra, which is where the Taj Mahal and the fort at Agra are located. That was just a day trip, and then 3 days in a town called Aurangabad, where there are rock-cut Buddhist monasteries, and that was right at the end of the trip. So with that as background, let me just say a few words about these talks. And as I said, I plan to talk about the Buddha's life and teachings combined with my own experiences, and to show you a few photos that I took when I was there. Nearly all of the photos I took myself, although I have supplemented them with a few from the internet, because there were some places that weren't allowed to take cameras. So I just took photos from the internet for those places. Now I'm going to present the Buddha's life in chronological order, starting with his birth, but the pilgrimage was not at all in chronological order. So I'm going to show you briefly the order that I visited in, and then I'll start on the pilgrimage proper. And I'm going to do that by sharing the screen. Oh, there we go. Okay, so can you see this map of India? Great. Okay, so I flew to Delhi, which is smack dab in the middle of northern India, as you can see. And I was there for 3 days. I'm not going to talk about that part of my trip because there aren't any significant Buddhist sites there. So I did visit a couple of places, but they were mostly Hindu and Muslim, so not really relevant, but still I enjoyed them. Anyway, so from Delhi, I flew then, so Delhi is kind of here on this insert map. From Delhi, I flew to Varanasi, which is here. You see Varanasi? And from Varanasi, Varanasi is the holiest city for Hindus. It's where Hindus aspire to die. And it's a pretty amazing place. But from Varanasi, we drove to Sarnath, and Sarnath is where the Buddha gave his first teachings in Deer Park. And then from Sarnath, we drove to Rajagara here, which used to be called Rajgir, City of Kings. And at Rajgir, there are several places that I visited, including Vulture Peak, which is often mentioned in the suttas, and the Bamboo Grove, also mentioned in the suttas, where the Buddha spent a lot of time teaching and meditating, and also Nalanda, which you can see just here. Nalanda is the site of the first residential university in the world, which happened to be Buddhist. And I'm going to talk about that in the fourth talk, the final talk, because it only became prominent sometime after the Buddha's death. So from Rajgir or Rajagatha, I drove to Vaishali, a town also that the Buddha frequently visited and where he first ordained nuns, and also gave his last talk in Vaishali. So that's Vaishali. And then we went to Kushinagar, which is where he died. And then up to Lumbini, where he was born, which is now in Nepal. And then after that, we went to this town, Kapilavastu, which is where the Buddha grew up and lived as a young man until he was 29. and then also visited this town, which used to be called Shravasti, where he spent time as well. And this is the site, Shravasti is the site of Jeta's Grove, which is mentioned in the suttas. And he spent more retreats, rainy season retreats there than anywhere else. And that's where the pilgrimage ended. And then I had the 2 extensions that I mentioned. So as you can see, Lucy, do you want to come and sit in the chair? So let me just say that you can see someone else in the background. This is Lucy. Do you want to say hello?
Hello.
Lucy is my step-granddaughter, I guess, who is just arrived with her dad from Taiwan to start a new life in the US, and Mom's coming over shortly. So they're staying with us for a while. So Lucy had some interest in this talk, so I invited her to join us. So that was, you can see that the order that I went in on this trip was nothing like the chronological order of the Buddha's life, but I thought it would be easier to do this, talk about it using the chronological order. So I think it's also important to remember that nothing was written down about the Buddha until about 200 years after his death. It was all transmitted orally. And of course, you know, his life was embellished and mythologized over the centuries. And so although many of the things I'm going to talk about, places I'm going to talk about, have a basis in the archaeological record, I can't say that everything I'm going to say is 100% true because we have no written record and it's all been embellished since then. Lastly, let me say that if you have any specific questions as I'm going along that are specific to a particular area or a particular slide, please go ahead and raise your Zoom hand. If you have any general questions or questions that may take a while to answer, then let's hold those till the end, and I'm sure there will be time to answer them, to respond to them. But if you have anything urgent, raise your electronic hand. I'm on screen share, so I can't see you all at this point. So please just raise your little green hand or whatever color it is. So now I want to just show you a couple of slides to contextualize the pilgrimage a little bit. This is a slide of my driver and guide for the main pilgrimage. I wanted you to meet them. This is Jackie, who was my guide, and this is Abhishek, who was my driver. And they were just wonderful. Jackie lives in Bodh Gaya with his wife and 2 young kids, and Abhishek, I think Abhishek lives in Varanasi, yeah. And he didn't have much English, unfortunately, so we didn't speak too much, but he was great. He drove like a Formula One driver, like he was pretending to be it was just, I just sat in the back seat. It was just really nerve-wracking. And if anyone goes to India, please don't rent a car and drive yourselves. It's totally scary. Rent a car and a driver and have someone drive you. Really, it's much better. So that's Jackie and Abhishek, who I spent 2.5 weeks with. This is a typical street scene in a city. You know, you've got various animals wandering the street. I'm not quite sure what this is, but you know, there's cows, there's goats, there's chickens occasionally, but dogs, a lot of feral dogs. You know, the place, you can't quite tell if the place is being, things are being built or they're kind of falling apart, probably a bit of both. And people just sitting by the street, on the street, just, you know, on their cell phones like this guy is, or just looking around. So I just thought I'd show you, this is a kind of fairly typical street scene in India. And the other thing that's missing from that previous slide is the vegetables. So I had to show you this. So this is just a slide. Everywhere on the roads in the towns, there are street vendors selling the most amazing vegetables that looked absolutely delicious. Mostly the diet in India is vegetarian. They don't eat beef, of course, because the cows are sacred. They do eat chicken and a little goat, but a lot of just really wonderful veggies. The downside, one challenge of this trip, the biggest challenge that I faced was the air pollution. The air pollution in northern and northeastern India is just awful. I developed a cough as soon as I got there, and I'm still coughing a little bit now, having been back 2 weeks. I don't know how people live there, I have to say. I guess they're used to it. But it's just really, really bad because of all the diesel they're burning in the motorbikes and the cars. Open garbage burning of plastic, and they have these brickworks everything's made of brick. They have these kind of brickworks with big smokestacks every few miles that are just pumping yuck into the air. So this is a real public health issue that I don't think they've really fully, addressed yet. Life expectancy in India is not good, I think partly because of the air pollution. It's only 70 years old is the life expectancy in India, 69 for men and just about 72 for women, compared with 85 in the US right now. So not a very long life expectancy. So okay, moving on. There are two architectural structures I want to introduce you to that we're going to see quite a lot of over the next 4 weeks if you come back to subsequent talks. The first one is a stupa. And this is actually the Dharmek stupa I'm going to be talking about a little bit next week. A stupa is a mounded or domed structure containing the remains of Buddhist monks or nuns or kind of famous lay people. Stupas are shrines, and they're used as places of meditation, and it's common to circumambulate, to walk around stupas, and I walked around as many as I could. So this is one shape of stupa. Stupas come in all kinds of shapes and sizes and degrees of wholeness. A lot of them, the older ones, are in ruins now. And this is another picture of a ruined stupa. You can see it in the background here. Quite a different shape than the first one. So stupas have been constructed all over the Buddhist world ever since the time of the Buddha. And for those on Whidbey, there's even one at the Earth Sanctuary. There's a stupa in the Earth Sanctuary. I don't know what remains it contains, but there is one there. You may know if you visited the Earth Sanctuary. So the other structure I wanted to mention, because it's important, is the Ashokan pillars. And Terry, yeah, you have a question. Go ahead, unmute yourself.
With the stupas, in the stupas, the remains are contained within the central space, or are they built into them, and are they ashes?
So often, yes, it's a great question. So often it's ashes because Buddhists originally Buddhists were cremated. And so, yes, it's ashes, and they call it relics is what they call it actually. But yes, it includes ashes, and they're often put in little containers that are then put in larger caskets that are put into the stupa.
In the space?
Yeah.
Like they're free in the space, they're not.
You can't go into, you don't go into stupas.
No.
although some of them are filled apparently with statues of the Buddha, which is interesting. But you can't go into them.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Great question. So, Ashokan pillars. So, this is the second structure I wanted to introduce you to. And Ashokan pillars are columns constructed throughout the Indian subcontinent by King Ashoka. And King Ashoka ruled much of the Indian subcontinent from 268 to 232 BCE. So this is just over 200 years after the Buddha's death. King Ashoka ruled. And he started out as a young man being a particularly warlike king, and he liked invading places, including the state of Orissa, what's called Orissa today. And after he'd done a fair amount of killing and raping and pillaging, he felt really remorseful as he got older for all the suffering he had caused. And so he became a Buddhist. And under Ashoka, Buddhism became the kind of de facto law of the land. And so in order to promote the law of the land, Buddhism, Buddhist ways of thinking, King Ashoka had the basic teachings carved onto the pillars in inscriptions, and also with some stories from his own life. And then he had these pillars put up at suitable locations, often marking Buddhist sites. And many of them have these capitals on top. There were different types of animal capitals. This one is a lion, and lions became increasingly important to Ashoka. And the lion capital is shown on the flag of the Supreme Court of India today. This is the Ashokan. So this is the Ashokan legacy. There are very few standing intact Ashokan pillars today. This one here is a very good example. This one is from Vaishali, and I'll be talking about that in a couple of weeks, talking about it. Ashokan pillars are on average 40 to 50 feet high and weigh about 50 tons each, and were dragged hundreds of miles to be put up in the locations that they are in. And there's lots of, even though there's very few as intact as this one, there are lots of broken down Ashokan pillars, and I'm going to show you some of those where they've collapsed, and the remnants are still there. So, with all of that said, let's start with the Buddha's birth. Are you up for this? Are you ready? So, the Buddha was born in Lumbini, and this is one of the 4 places that he encouraged his followers to visit, of course. And Lumbini is where his mother, Maya, decided she couldn't travel any further before giving birth. So Prince Siddhartha, as the Buddha was called before his awakening, was born about 2,500 years ago. And he was the first son of King Suddhodana. And Suddhodana was chief of the Sakyan clan. And Maya, the Buddha's mom, was his main wife. But Suddhodana actually married Maya and her younger sister, Pajapati Gautami. That's Maya's younger sister. And if you were here back a couple of months ago, you may remember that we talked about some of those poems, the Therigatha poems, and I included and talked about a poem by Pajapati Gautami, same woman, Buddha's aunt and stepmom, and also eventually a nun. So if that name sounds familiar to you, that's why. So anyway, of the 2 sisters, Maya was the first to get pregnant, and like Jesus, the conception of Prince Siddhartha was rather miraculous. That's why I say don't believe 100% of what I say. Queen Maya reported that a magnificent white elephant entered her side with a lotus flower in its trunk and somehow made her pregnant. Anyway, it was tradition for women to go to their parents' house to give birth. And so as the birth approached, Maya set off for her parents' house in Devadea, where they lived. But she didn't make it. She only made it as far as Lumbini. And this is where she gave birth. And here's a representation of her giving birth at the Austrian Buddhist temple in Lumbini. And supposedly she gave birth in a standing position. You'll see she's standing up here, holding the branch of a sal tree. And sal trees are pretty important in the Buddha's story. He also died lying between two sal trees, S-A-L. The Buddha apparently emerged miraculously from her right side, so that's why he's on her right side, as in his adult form, as a baby version of an adult. And after he was born, he immediately took 7 steps. So that's what this is representing, him taking the first of his 7 steps. And here you can see the devas, the heavenly beings, are throwing down petals and all good things onto Maya, honoring the birth. And here are some gods and goddesses also recognizing, and here are some ordinary people all watching the Buddha's birth and giving thanks. So this is a representation of Maya giving birth. So, but what does it look like today? What does this place Lumbini actually look like today? So this is what it looks like today. And here's a site map of Lumbini. And this area from here right down to here is about 3 miles long. So it's a big site, and it's about a mile across. So, and this is where, right here in this circle, is where the main site, the main temple complex is. Here is, so coming out from the main temple complex, there is this long canal that is actually so big you can it has boats on it. And then there are monasteries on either side. So this is the Western monastic zone, and here's the Eastern monastic zone. So the Austrian temple that I just showed you is actually in the Western monastic zone. And then partway up the canal, there is a statue of the Buddha that I'll show you in a minute. And right at the end here, there is a World Peace Pagoda that was built by the Japanese. So this is a huge site. But I want to start here in the main temple complex. And this is the Maya Devi temple. This is where Maya supposedly gave birth. This building was actually constructed only in 1956. So, and it basically houses, it houses the actual place where she gave birth, and also some remains of monasteries. And here's a slide of the inside of the Maya Devi temple. So this is what that structure is protecting. And I wasn't allowed, no cameras allowed inside. So as you can see, this is a photo taken from the web. And what you're looking, so there is a walkway all the way around here, and you can see somebody looking here all the way right. And this picture is taken from the walkway. You walk all the way around up here. And what you're looking at here is the remains of a monastery, or monasteries, I should say, because monasteries were often built on top of each other as the centuries went by. One crumbled and then they built another one on top of it. the walkway ends here where all these people are. And what they're looking, you probably can't quite see, but they're looking down at this place here. And this underneath here, there is a glass enclosure with a big white stone, which is where the actual spot where she allegedly gave birth. And it's kind of protected. You can only just, as I say, you can look down and see it, but you can't touch it or anything. And people just kind of slowly walk past it. So that's the inside of the Maya Devi temple. Outside the temple, there is this, an Ashokan pillar. This one doesn't have a capital, it's fallen off. As you can see, it's very close to the temple building. And this one has an inscription on it that says this is where the Buddha was born. So, and it's got a railing around it, and people were throwing in flowers, and you can see their various flags and so on. It's really a place where people go and, you know, pay their respects and pray and meditate and so on. So that's the Ashokan pillar in Lumbini. And also just in the temple grounds there, in that kind of circular area that I showed you, there's this pond, the Maya Devi pond, and you can see all of these are ruins of monasteries around here. We've got some mostly Thai monks here. There's a group of Tibetan monks here, although you can't quite see them. They've got darker robes on, and these are all Tibetan prayer flags that are strung between the trees. Tibetan prayer flags are everywhere at these Buddhist sites. Anyway, this pond is significant because it is where Maya took a bath before she gave birth to Prince Siddhartha, and also where she gave her newborn son his first bath. And I spent quite a long time meditating here on these steps. You can go down, step down here. And I meditated here for most of a morning, and also spent some time watching the fish, and there are enormous fish in this pond, and also some smaller turtles. And so I spent some time watching them. And these monks there were monks everywhere, and quite a few nuns, and a lot of chanting going on, and also visiting tourists, often led by monks in groups from Japan, and a lot from Burma, and some from India too, and some from Thailand, and Cambodia and Vietnam too. Not a lot of Westerners. I saw very few Westerners while I was in India at all. Did talk to one German family and a French couple, but very few Americans or Europeans. Mostly Asians were there at all the sites that I went to. So now I want to move down that big canal that I showed you a little bit, and show you a few slides from further down the canal. And okay, so this is about halfway down the canal, and this is a statue of the baby Buddha in his full, baby form, adult form, at his birth, and he's pointing up to the heavens. And this statue was donated by Thailand in 2012, so it's a modern statue, and it is covered in gold leaf. So a lot of the statues that I saw were covered in gold leaf. And there's some nice benches around here that I sat on. These two people are just having a chat. And you can see the canal in the background here. Oh, here's the canal. I'm sorry, here's the canal, because here are the lights on the canal. This is just a little lake nearby. So there's this little fellow, and then further down the canal again, there is this eternal flame that has been there, I think, since World War II, a long time. And this is a shot down the canal. You can see a boat here on the canal. And in the distance, you can just see the Peace Pagoda. So this really emphasizes, I think, the scale of this site in Lumbini. It's just huge. So, and here's the Peace Pagoda at the end, built by the Japanese. I know this one was built after World War II. You can't go inside, but you can walk around it, and a lot of people did. And you can also walk up these steps. So that's a pretty impressive building, quite big. You know, you can see it all the way from, just about see it, all, certainly from the Eternal Flame. And if you squint, if you have binoculars, you can see it all the way from the Maya Devi temple at the other end. So one other place that I want to talk about in Lumbini is this place. And this rather humble monastery and temple is not on the canal, doesn't face the canal like the grand monasteries and temples do. The Austrian one that I showed you the picture of a few minutes ago, the representation of Maya giving birth. This one is kind of on a back street, but it is a nunnery. It is the only nunnery at Lumbini. And I spent, you know, Buddhist nuns, the cause of the Buddhist nuns is very close to my heart, as some of you know. And so I spent quite a bit of time here. There's a temple right through here with a big statue of the Buddha. And this is where the nuns live, in these rooms. I'm not sure if it's dormitories or rooms right here. And you can see another statue of the Buddha here. And what's particularly interesting is, or a couple of things, this place is dedicated to Pajapati Gautami. Here's her name, Gautami nun. The Buddha's stepmom, his aunt, the one who raised him, the one who wrote the Therigatha poem that we read. This is her monastery. It's dedicated to her. Now, she never actually lived here, let me say that. It was this, I think you can see, 1994 or something. But this monastery is dedicated, this nunnery is dedicated to her. And apparently it's really thriving. They have around a dozen nuns in residence and about as many novices. It's run by the Burmese. It's a Burmese nunnery. And so the nuns all wear these beautiful pale pink robes. But of course, in the Burmese tradition of Buddhism, the nuns are not of equal status to the monks. They are all subservient to the monks. So even if a nun has been ordained for 50 years, she still has to bow to a child monk who may have been ordained for a couple of weeks. So I think there's something wrong with that picture, but that's my own personal view. And I was also told that the nuns and the novices in this nunnery are allowed to chant in the Maya Devi temple every morning at sunrise. So, but they're thriving, and they're thriving. So that's the good news. So that's the nunnery at Lumbini. I just want to pause the share now because we're going to move on. Any questions about Lumbini at all before I do that? Any urgent questions at all? No? Okay, I don't see any. Yes, Linda, I do see one.
Sorry, I had to find the thing. I just was curious. Was there was so the way the birth of the prince that became the Buddha was depicted, was there an expectation that there was going to be something really awesome and special about the birth of this baby? Or is that all like later that it got made more hoopla about it because he became special?
Yes. So I'm going to talk about that in just a minute because there were prophecies made about the Buddha's life. So the astrologers knew that or predicted that that Prince Siddhartha was going to be someone special. Yes.
Oh, okay. That makes more sense then. It was like, how did they
Yeah.
kind of know about or whatever? Thank you. So
Yeah.
you're going to talk about that some more.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Oh, good.
I will.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to hear that part.
Yeah. In just a couple of minutes, actually. Yeah. Imasol.
Yes, hi, Kate. I was just wondering, why does it say Austrian temple?
Austria, because it is a temple built and donated by the Austrian Buddhist Sangha. That's why. So let me go back to this one. So you see where it says Western Monastic Zone and East Monastic Zone? All of these are different temples that have been built by the Buddhists in different countries. So there's like a Burmese temple, there's a Thai temple, there's a German temple, there's an Austrian temple. They're building a Canadian temple, not on the canal, not facing the canal, because all of that land's been taken now. So all of these are temples and monasteries that have been built and donated by the Buddhists in specific countries, and one of them is Austria.
Oh wow! Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Yeah, I went in some of the temples, other than the Austrian one. I went in a few, and the most stunning one was actually from Bhutan. Was just gorgeous. But I don't have time to show a lot of those slides. So, but if anyone wants to, I can do that at some other occasion. I didn't go in all of them because they're like, I don't know, 20 or 30 altogether. So I just went in, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4, including the Austrian one, where I took that picture. Rosha, hi there. Yeah, you're on mute, dear.
Yeah.
There you are.
I couldn't take my eyes off that line where it says observe, refraining from eyes. I think that's wonderful. We should all have that on a t-shirt or something.
So these two things here, I observe refraining from telling lies, and I observe refraining from taking any intoxicant or drug. These are the last 2 of the 5 precepts. I couldn't get a good shot of the site plan and all the precepts, but these are the 2 of the basic Buddhist precepts. The first one is to refrain from causing harm or killing. The second one is to refrain. I'm forgetting my precepts. This is dreadful. There's one on refraining from ill speech, and I'm missing one. That's awful. It'll come to me. But anyway, there are 5 of them, and this picture just happened to include the last 2. But it's interesting that they put them up on a sign like this next to the site map, above the site map. Yeah, it just shows, I think, how important they are. How important Buddhism was to the culture and the society. It's not now. Buddhism's not at all important in India, but it certainly was, and that is shown at these sites. Yeah. Thanks. Anything else? Any others before I move on?
Yeah. So who was the Buddha's dad?
The Buddha's dad was King Suddhodana.
Oh, King Siddhartha, yeah.
Yeah.
That got a little bit confusing. So he had 2 wives?
He had multiple wives. I think we only know about the 2 of them, about Maya and Pajapati, but it was very common in those days. Well, I think it was the norm, especially for rulers, for kings, clan chiefs like King Suddhodana to take multiple wives. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, I heard a talk from Thich Nhat Hanh when he was talking about the white elephant.
Yeah.
And if have you heard it?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Because yeah, it's somewhere in YouTube. I remember I saw it there a long time ago.
Yeah,
So,
elephants are sacred animals in
yeah.
Hinduism.
And
Yeah.
he was talking about that story that you mentioned about the white elephant with the lotus.
Yeah, yeah, entering Maya's side. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Kate.
Yeah. Thanks, Emerson. Yeah. Okay. So there we are. Let me get my pointer. All right. So now we're going to move quickly back through Lumbini, and actually, I'm going to pause it there for a minute, and just want to talk about the next place before I show you a slide of that. So now we're going 18 miles from Lumbini to a small town that today is called Piprawa. And Piprawa is most likely the site of the ancient city of Kapilavastu, which was the capital of the Sakyan kingdom, or the Sakyan clan, King Suddhodana's capital, in other words. And this is where Prince Siddhartha lived with his family for the first 29 years of his life. And once Maya made it back to the palace with the infant Prince Siddhartha, and this speaks to Linda's question, an astrologer predicted that the young prince would either become a great king or he would renounce the world and become a great religious leader. One of those 2 options. And that's why he was given the name Siddhartha, because it means Siddhartha means he who has achieved his goal. So very sadly, Queen Maya died about 10 days after the Buddha's birth back at the palace. And so then he was raised by his aunt and his stepmom, Pajapati Gotami, whose the nunnery was dedicated to. Meanwhile, King Suddhodana listened to the prophecies of the astrologers, and he really wanted his son to succeed him, as I guess a king would. He didn't like the idea that his son might renounce the world and become a religious leader, a monk, a religious leader. So he tried to protect his son from all the unpleasantness in the world. In other words, when Prince Siddhartha grew up, he was just surrounded apparently by everything pleasant. He didn't see anything unpleasant. Wonderful fountains, dancers, beautiful art, fine food, whatever. So the story goes. Because his father thought that if he saw everything pleasant and didn't experience suffering, that he would want to become king, that he'd like everything pleasant, and that he wouldn't want to give that up. So that was why he did that. And so Prince Siddhartha grew up in the palace, surrounded with every comfort, every luxury. But the story goes that the king's plan backfired, and that when he was 29, the prince got curious about life outside the palace compound. And on 3 successive chariot rides with his charioteer, whose name was Chana, and his horse, and I've forgotten the horse's name, he saw suffering for the first time. And first of all, Prince Siddhartha saw an old person. He'd never seen an old person, you know, stooped over and walking hunched. And then he saw, the next visit out from the palace, he saw someone who was really sick, lying on the ground, really obviously very ill. And the third time he went out, he saw a dead person lying on the street, a corpse. And for the very first time, with those three sights, seeing those three things for the first time, he realized that he too was subject to old age, sickness, and death, that he would get old, that he would get sick, and that eventually he would die. It was part of the human experience, and therefore that suffering was inevitable in life. And you may have heard that before, because it's the first noble truth, that suffering is inevitable in life. But on his last trip out of the palace, well, his penultimate trip out of the palace, he saw something else. He saw a holy man. He saw, you know, a holy man who had renounced the world and was wandering around, you know, in rags, begging for food, trying to live a holy life, which is what they did back then. And the holy man inspired Prince Siddhartha to follow a similar path in search of the freedom from the suffering that he had observed in the old person, the sick person, and the dead person. And these four sights, the sight of an old person, a sick person, a dead person, and a holy person, are now called the four divine messengers, or the four heavenly messengers. And occasionally Buddhist teachers will do talks on the four heavenly messengers or the four divine messengers. And they remind us that there is a way to end suffering, which of course is the third noble truth. By that time, as I said, the prince was 29 years old, and he had gotten married to a woman called Yasodhara, and he had a newborn son called Rahula. But he decided to abandon them, to abandon his life in the palace as the prince, and to renounce the world and to seek an end to suffering. And he didn't actually return to Kapilavastu until many years after his enlightenment, when he was received by his father, the king, who was still alive, by his stepmom and aunt who had raised him, Pajapati Gautami, by his wife, and by his then teenage son, Rahula. So that's the story. Now I want to show you basically what it looks like today. And this is it. This is Piprawa, thought to be the site of Kapilavastu. And this is mostly what's there. There isn't a lot else there. And this is known as the Sakyans Stupa. And originally it held a portion of the Buddha's relics. So after the Buddha was cremated, his relics were entrusted to a group of lay disciples, but people from 7 other regions came and demanded that they be given the relics, the ashes, the fragments of hair and bone and teeth. And they were pretty insistent that they had deserved the Buddha's relics. So in order to avert bloodshed, to avoid it, a Brahmin called Drona divided up the relics into 8 portions. And one of these portions was given to the Sakyans because that was his clan, his tribe. His father was king of the Sakyans, and was put into this stupa. However, they're not there today because about 250 years later, after the Buddha's death, King Ashoka of the Pillars collected the relics from 7 of the 8 stupas and the story goes, redistributed them into 84,000 stupas that he ordered to be constructed. So he took 7 sets of relics and divided them into 84,000. Don't know how that happened, but that's the story. So also I should say that this is probably, Piprawa is probably the site of the Sakyan of Kapilavastu, but there is a bit of a debate. Some people say that Kapilavastu is actually located in Nepal at a different place because that's where they found evidence of a palace. But the stupa is certainly in Piprawa, and it's where I was told the site of Kapilavastu is, but there is some disagreement about that. So I've got 2 more slides to show you, and I'm noticing the time here, so I better hurry up. So I want to show you this slide, which I thought was rather amusing. This is signs like this, no TikTok, are recent additions to all of the Buddhist sites that I visited. My guide, Jackie, had never seen them before, so he took a photo of this site, of this sign, and all the others that we passed. But I thought, gosh, this is a sign of the times at a Buddhist holy site, no TikTok. So I'm going to leave it there for today. So imagining Siddhartha's birth in Lumbini and his early life in Kapilavastu. And next week, I'm going to talk about 3 places. Pragbodhi Cave, which is where the Buddha went after he left, or one of the places he went after he left the palace. I'm going to talk about Bodh Gaya and the Bodhi tree. And I'm going to talk about Deer Park in Sarnath, where he gave his first teachings. So that's coming up. It's a preview of next week. So if anyone has any questions, I would love to be able to respond to them. General questions, specific questions. Hey Talia, wonderful to see you, my dear. Beautiful. But if you have to go, please feel free to sign off. So comments, questions, anything general, specific you'd like to ask? Terry.
No. I was wondering about the TikTok sign, if that was a protection. No, seriously, this is a serious.
Let's be serious.
Is it a protection against? You don't have to be serious. Is it a protection of the Buddhists because of the treatment they've had from the Chinese?
I don't think so. I think it's more about trying to maintain, keep some sense of peace and quiet, although not very successfully. All of the sites that I visited were pretty noisy. There are just so many people there. But, you know, it could be. I guess that's a possibility. Yeah, certainly India is not. I found that India was pretty concerned about China and about what's happening in China. The Chinese are obviously they've taken over Tibet. They're now influencing Pakistan very heavily and also Sri Lanka. So India's kind of getting surrounded by a strong Indian influence and Chinese influence, and they're pretty concerned about that. So you might well be right. You might be right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, Courtney says decorum and etiquette. There'd be dozens of people making videos. Yeah, there would. Yeah, and that may be the reason. Yeah. So Talia, do you have a question?
I was wondering what the source of their food is. How do they get food in to eat?
Whose food?
The nuns and,
Oh, the
and the
nuns?
people and stuff.
So the monks and the nuns, a lot of them would do alms. The Thai monks and the Burmese monks would do alms rounds in the town. So, and I passed monks who were actually doing alms rounds. So they have their big bowls and they accept donations of food because they're not allowed to handle money or to buy food, you know, like a layperson would. They're dependent on donations of food. That's for the Thai and the Burmese and other Theravadan monks and nuns. The Tibetans, on the other hand, and I think Chinese Buddhists, they're allowed to handle money, so they don't, you know, they'll just go to the store and buy food. From these wonderful vegetable markets, for example, on the side of the road. So, yeah, I actually passed a Tibetan monk, a married Tibetan monk who had his wife and kids with him. Just like, you know, the Keeling Rinpoche here on Whidbey is a Tibetan monk is married and has kids. So one of the Tibetan lineages allows people to marry and, you know, almost live, I won't say a lay life, it's not a lay life, but the rules aren't quite as strict. So the Theravadan tradition, they're more strict, and the monks and nuns aren't allowed to handle money, or they're dependent on the community for their food. And that's the way the Buddha set it up, so that the monks and nuns wouldn't move into monasteries and become isolated from the community. That they you know, the monks would wander from place to place, except in the rainy season, and they'd offer their teachings to the villages that they were in, and then the villagers would offer dana, offer them donations of food and accommodation in order to thank them for the teachings. That's where the tradition of dana comes from. Mm-hmm. And it's a way of keeping, you know, the monks and nuns part of the community and not isolated off in some monastery. Yeah. Any other thoughts or reflections? Yeah, Linda.
So this is probably way too big of a question, but you had said, it was sort of a throwaway line, that Buddhism is no longer important in India now. And so it was like, well, why is that?
Yeah.
So if that, it could be a short answer, or it could be, nope, we don't have time for that kind of a question.
Yeah.
What is my question?
It's a big answer. And I'm going to be, there are a number of possible reasons. No one is completely sure, but I will be talking about some of the possible reasons in the fourth and final talk, because Buddhism virtually died out in India. In 1951, there were like only 100 and something thousand Buddhists in India, which is, compared to India's population, is like virtually no Buddhists. And even today, there are only between 10 and 20 million Buddhists out of a population of 1.45 billion people. So it's pretty tiny today still. Yeah. There are lots of reasons that we'll explore. Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Great. Lupe.
Hi, thank you.
Hi.
This is beautiful. I'm still stuck on the stupa.
Okay, it's a great place to be stuck.
I was wondering, so how do they get the ashes in there? Is there somebody that's in charge that can go in there and put them in there? Or is there just a hole they open up and they just dump it in? Like, I don't understand.
Yes. So you know, I don't know. Let me tell you what I think. Okay. So the ashes and the relics are put in a small container, and then that's often put in a larger casket. And and then those are put, the casket, the larger casket is put inside the stupa. So often there are stairs up to a stupa. And then I would imagine that the casket, before the stupa is finished, that there's an opening, and the casket is put inside, and then it's bricked up or covered over with with
Okay,
that's
so
what I would imagine.
do you have to pay for your space there? Or do you have to be part of a lineage or?
Yeah. So stupas were constructed mostly for the relics of monks and nuns or lay people who were pretty senior disciples of the Buddha, and people often would come together after the death and build the stupa. I think there are a few cases where kings in particular had stupas built before they died that were then used for their relics. I think that's also true, but for Buddhist purposes, it's something that happened after death. That makes sense? Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much for hanging in, folks.
Thank you.
It was, I hope that's given you a taste of the Buddha's early life and some of what I experienced. India is an amazing country, and I learned so much while I was there about Buddhist history and culture and just history in that part of the world. And it just seems like such big history. I was saying this to someone on the phone yesterday, the day before. It's like, these waves of invaders from all over the place, from, Alexander the Great to the Mughals to the British Empire, of course, much later. It's like, this is history writ huge, and I was in school, I was only taught British history, and it all seems so kind of puny and small, even the British Empire, compared to Asian history. It was so, I don't know, it really was great to hear about it and learn a little bit. And I felt very grateful for that opportunity, because it's a history that I don't know very well. So yeah, a wonderful experience. I learned lots, meditated lots, saw lots, and had a lovely time. And I hope you'll join me next week when I'll talk about the Pragbodhi cave. And yeah, Lupe, did you have a
I just
question?
wanted to ask, so did you get sick? Because everyone says that they.
Yes, is the answer.
Yes.
And the circumstances were that it was quite early on in the trip. I remember I said I flew from Delhi to Varanasi, and there was a meal served on the plane, which I ate. And I probably shouldn't have done, because after I got to Varanasi, a couple of hours later, I got quite violently ill, and couldn't leave the bathroom. But it was intense, but it only lasted a few hours overnight. I was meant to go on a cruise on the Ganges at Varanasi to look at the cremation pyres at dawn the following morning and see the sunrise, and I missed that. I was still in the bathroom.
Were you able to use the tools of meditation to help you go through that sickness, to help ease the?
You did, yeah. I mean, I use meditation whenever I don't feel well. I come into myself, sense the sensations, and work with them. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Well, friends, thanks so much for hanging in, and I hope to see you next week. Pragbodhi Cave and Bodh Gaya, which was amazing, and Sarnath, which was also amazing. So I hope to see you then. And in the meantime, have a wonderful week.
Thank you.
And thanks
Thank
for your
you.
practice. Yeah. Take care, everyone. So good to see
Thank
you.
you.
So much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
TikTok size only
What? Quit.